Thank you both for being here. I really appreciate it. And I would say that this is, to me, as interesting, or I think about this topic as much as I think about fashion, as being a journalist and kind of seeing all these different models come up. And this week alone, there's been so much news in the space. I'm sure you all read about the Condé Nast International merging with Condé Nast US. Then yesterday, Bustle, which is a digital media group in New York, bought Mike.com, a news publication for millennials, in a fire sale. And then, you know, I was doing my extra research this morning,
Yes, you do.
and on Google News, looking up these gentlemen's names, and I saw that there was an article in The Guardian about the FT, regarding John and what some of the journalists kind of issues that they've been having with the business in terms of transparency and other things, but a lot of it is that John has made a lot of money because the company is doing well, and they seem to be sort of frustrated by that, so there's been some pushback from the union. So I think before we talk about anything else, maybe, John, you can kind of speak to what's going on at the FT and how it relates back to what's happening in digital media altogether, because it's an exciting time. There's a lot of content being read, but people are still kind of unclear on how to monetize that content.
Yeah, thank you. Well, first, thank you, David, for the piece.
Yes, this is what I say, nothing
Yeah.
to do with
But
the
no, listen,
editorial
I think
output.
it's fair enough. It's a tough neighborhood. We challenge people every day in our pages, and we should be open to challenge ourselves. This row blew up over my pay, which partly related to the acquisition, but also the business performance. I didn't obviously set my pay, but it did go up quite a lot last year. Created a bit of a storm. I listened, I heard. It was hard not to hear. As David will know, newsrooms are pretty noisy places. I thought hard about it, and I decided actually that the right thing to do was to give back all of the pay increase that I got in 2017 to reinvest it in women, the development of women at the FT. That's an area where we need to work harder and do more. So I did. I put the whole increase from 2017 back to fund development of women at the FT and their careers. But to your bigger point, I think it is. You know, it's a tough, and I think part of this reflects that it's a very tough neighborhood, news media. We've been going through disruption for well over a decade. And it never stops. And I think you know, the result, or one of the results, is the news and information ecosystem is in crisis. And I think that matters to us all, not just to me and David and our organizations. It's led to, it's both been a symptom and a cause of social and political issues, the polarization of news, populism, and the whole rise of the big tech and social media platforms has created a huge crisis for traditional and quality news media. It's a really fundamental challenge. The way we've thought about it is to get on the front foot, not to play defense, but to play offense, to try and find a new business model that enables the sustained growth of quality journalism. And there's no one way of doing this, but fundamentally building that relationship with readers, developing a paid-for reader revenue model is the way to go, particularly when Google and Facebook are hoovering up most of the ad dollars in the world. It works. So we've built a reader revenue model. We have more readers than we've ever had in our 130-year history. And I think we're proving that quality journalism based on the traditions and principles of trust, quality, and integrity of reporting is something actually that readers really value and they really care about, particularly in a world of fake news and polarization. So it's definitely not easy, but we think there is a future. It gets harder every year in some respects, but I think there is a way through it, and I think it does come down to trust and confidence in quality reporting and journalism.
David, I want to hear your big picture thoughts on this too, but John, you brought up fake news, and the first Voices happened a month after Donald Trump was elected, and I remember the feeling then, and so we've only done this since he's been in office, and that year obviously was also the Brexit vote. Do you think that these paid models that are coming out now would have as much traction if the culture wasn't going in that direction and people weren't so fearful? Is it driven by fear, the willing to pay for a subscription or pay for the Guardian David, you can
Yeah.
speak to the Guardian model.
Look, it won't be a great surprise. I mean, we must make sure this conversation becomes sort of hopeful towards the end, but let's go down a bit. The world, we know that the world is full of discourse right now. We know that Donald Trump and Brexit, and indeed anything that's happening across Europe, is coming from a complete fragmentation of society. And as a result of that, almost through societal discord combined with structural decline in ways in which news organisations are funded, you've then got at the same time a global audience who are looking for answers, looking for reassurance, and looking to be guided through this discourse. And you just can't imagine the contradictions of those three spheres all happening at the same time. However, within all of that, and I thought it was interesting that Stella talked yesterday, through all of this disruption, one can actually find opportunity. And our numbers, as Imran said at the beginning, we've gone from the 9th largest newspaper in the UK out of 10 to one of the 3rd largest news brands in the world. Our numbers globally continue to go up. We're consistently getting over 1 billion page impressions a month. Our reader contribution model has gone from 0 to an aggregated number of 1 million. And obviously you then look at other news organisations such as the New York Times and the Washington Post, who, I think these are terrible words, have probably benefited from this discourse. And people describe it, and I think you should never trivialise the impact of Trump, but people describe that as the Trump bump in terms of how many numbers we're now getting. But I think people are really anxious. I think that if in a time when people are consuming a lot of their content within Facebook or Google or Instagram or indeed any other social media, trying to understand what is truthful and what isn't has become a massive problem. And I heard someone say the other day that quality is starved of oxygen. And I think that's a really interesting description when you have such virality across these platforms. And to think that there are people who will sit in rooms and use algorithms to inform what artificially they should create from content, essentially to create page impressions that drives advertising. It is fraud, illegal. And yet a lot of the tech platforms benefit hugely from the engine room of fake news, as opposed to people like John and I who are navigating through the monetization of content. And I think there is, when you align ourselves up with people like Facebook, our business model is trying to find the monetization of quality, and Facebook's business model is very successfully driving revenue from virality. You could not have two more opposing business models, one evidently more successful than the other.
So how do you monetize quality? How do you, what works? What do people pay for? I know what converts on Business of Fashion. But what converts your readerships? Your readerships are very different. You're paying for different reasons. They're paying in different ways. How do you get them to do it?
I mean, I think that it's just having a very informed, deep, engaged interest. And it could be around a brand. It could be around a columnist. It's having that relationship with a reader that they really value what makes you different and what makes you special. I think that one of the central elements. I mean, people say, well, it's easy at the FT to charge for an FT subscription because most of your readers are business people and they can charge it to the company or whatever. Maybe, and I think it doesn't hurt, it helps. But the reality is actually, I think any brand that has integrity, by which I mean a real valuable relationship to a consumer or a reader or whatever, can be able to charge. There's no mystery about news, and I really object to the term paywall. I mean, all it is just asking people to pay for something they value. It's the same with anything, with a car, with clothes, with food. So I think it is all about being different, having something that people really value. And if you don't have something that people are willing to pay for, then you've got to ask yourself, what are you doing? Is it worth it? So, you know, I think that and I think we're seeing this, you mentioned it in your comments, that this is becoming accepted. I think most publishers realize now that you cannot generate news and quality news on the basis of advertising alone. There just isn't enough for news organizations. So it has to be a reader revenue model. But there's lots of ways you can monetize around that. You know, David's approach is different from ours. There's other models out there. But ultimately, you've got to have a value proposition around something that makes you special and different.
I think that in 2015, as Imran said in the introduction, as The Guardian, through pursuit of reach and impact in the world, primarily funded by advertising, it is clear that we flew very close to the sun. We were at an EBITDA level, it was nearly $100 million loss. And we did that in pursuit of being open and accessible to all. And what sits at the heart of The Guardian is a profound sort of belief in open access, and not believing, and it's not a contradiction to the FT's business model, but we just don't believe what we do we should be taxing for consumption, and we should try and be as open as possible. But what was evident in 2015, the relationship between reach and advertising contribution snapped, and we were left with a bloody great hole. And there are two things that Kath Viner, when she became editor and I became chief executive, the only two things that people told us was just cut costs, put the paywall up, and everything will be fine. And thankfully, we decided not to do that. And when someone like Christopher sort of comes out from behind the shadow and makes a statement and contributes to Cambridge Analytica, or when someone like Edward Snowden gives up his liberty in those NSA stories, or when we have to talk about a lost community like Windrush, which ends up with Amber Rudd losing her job, we just don't believe that should be stuck behind, I'm sorry, John, a paywall. We really felt there must be something, a symbiotic relationship between the quality of what we produce and our amazing audience making a contribution. So we just simply asked them, and they paid.
And the way you ask them, can you speak a little bit about the kind of ask on every page on The Guardian and how you tweak that and really cut to the emotions?
I think in 2015, when things were very hairy, I don't know if anyone read what we described the epic then. It was essentially we're kind of broken and we sort of need your help quite quickly. We didn't have to create that. That was actually true. And you know, some of that language, I, as someone who cares passionately about this 200-year-old brand and has worked in marketing and loved brands, I did worry that the language at the time felt as if we'd sort of just run out of road and we would just kind of beg. And you know, can you imagine the debate within our organisation as we started to do that? Since then, as we get to break even in March and that deficit has been reduced, there's so much more sophistication that sits within the optimization of contributions. We have a reader funnel, we have 176 million browsers at the top, we have 10 million regulars, and our job is to turn those regulars into paying contributors. And there's a huge amount of data analysis that sits behind that, understanding the relationship between consumption and propensity to contribute.
So I could talk about paid media for another 35 minutes, but I know you guys are very hungry. I'm going to get to our other topics. We just had a bunch of Gen Z people up here. Very curious to know how you're trying to connect with that customer. John, you in particular, because your customer is seen, or your reader is seen as a professional. Are you guys on Instagram? Are you on Snapchat? If you are, how do you communicate with Gen Z, or what? I'm sure there's a new platform that they're on that I haven't heard about.
Yeah, I mean, while we have issues with social media from a business model perspective, let's be clear, it's the historically most powerful way of reaching most people on the planet. It's extraordinary. You know, we heard earlier from Kevin, I think, talking about the rise of China, but you know, if you think about it, Facebook in 14 years has gathered more followers than Christianity, and they log on more than they go to church, I guess. So for us to reach an audience globally, it's a very efficient way. So we do put stuff out for free on social media, quite a lot, because it brings people into contact with the brand. We have made the Financial Times free for all secondary school students all over the world, because we want people to get into the habit of quality journalism, not because we see them as future readers, we want them to be, but just because we think actually young people should read quality journalism, and they really engage with it deeply. So, you know, there's and sort of helping them navigate the content, because it can be a bit intimidating, frankly. So, you know, we have briefings of how to use the content, how to navigate the content. But I think the other thing is channel. It's not just, obviously digital is crucial, mobile is crucial. I think the other area that we're quite interested in terms of reaching new reader cohorts and younger cohorts is audio. I think audio is the big new disruptor for news media. It makes life kind of exciting and challenging at the same time. But certainly younger readers over-index on audio formats, so we're making quite a big push there too.
Yeah, have you figured out how to monetize podcasts yet? Because I think everyone wants to know.
We think at the moment they're generally pretty free, but they can be part of our subscription model, no doubt. The bigger challenge is sort of home assistance, the Alexa, Google Home, that kind of stuff. So, and that raises all sorts of challenges from a kind of monetization, but also from a branding perspective. We've spent 130 years being pink. Pink is not a sound. So, how do you figure that out? I don't have the answer yet.
I'm surprised with podcasts. I mean, I'm sure everyone in this room, how much more time have we got to consume? And we've just launched our daily podcast on a similar sort of idea to the New York Times, which has had phenomenal success with their daily podcast. And you're always sort of thinking, well, where on earth are we going to, in just a finite amount of time, going to consume more? And the numbers that we have been achieving through our daily podcast have been phenomenal. And so you must be, it's either screen fatigue, where people just need to put that thing down just for a second, or there must be moments where in our podcast it's not breaking news, it's actually in-depth analysis. And I wonder whether it's a demonstration of people wanting time to reflect and not just be inundated with what's breaking right now, but just a pause moment. And I welcome that. And so when you're taking that amount of audience into podcasts, it must be at the cost of something else. And maybe that's radio, which is very pacey and very breaking news. And the idea of moments of reflection is just sort of reassuring.
I also think it's more personal. I think people often forget with news and information and with brands in general, there is that emotional, personal aspect. And listening to a podcast is quite a personal experience. And I think people really appreciate that.
Yeah. So fashion coverage in general media has kind of always been connected to advertising revenue and driving revenue. I know the FT has How to Spend It, which is luxury. How has your fashion coverage changed in the past few years, and has it as, I don't know, I think the significance of the industry globally and how it connects to all these other issues has become more obvious to readers?
Well, I think it's become, bigger, frankly. For us, fashion and luxury have become hugely important parts of the business. In this whole storm of disruption, it's been one of the main growth areas, and it's been very important to us. I also think that we've worked much more closely with fashion brands around the whole digital transformation. I think that that's something that came a bit late to lots of fashion and luxury. They're certainly on it and big time now. And I think our own experience of going through that sort of analog to digital journey has actually made those partnerships work really well.
I mean, some of the topics which was discussed last night around sustainability, impact on the environment, as you can imagine, The Guardian has taken that kind of position. Jessica does have access to all of the shows and meets all of the designers, and I think is described as someone who fairly articulates the good things about the business. But as The Guardian, we also need to hold this industry, like other industries, to account. And when you listen to, it was just amazing last night and over the last couple of days by the fundamental changes of production and supply chain and impact on the environment does need to be commented on, and everyone needs to be held to account on that. And that's not a great surprise that The Guardian will cover that.
We have to wrap up, but I have one more question. What do you think about, looking at this Condé Nast thing, which everybody's talking about? Chantal Fernandez, our media reporter, was on the story. But looking at this and looking at their strategy, and they have a few paywalls in place, but New York Magazine in the US is also implementing a paywall. These are not publications that have traditionally been driven by news. They're not, maybe they're breaking news with a big exclusive profile of someone in an issue, but it's not, they haven't traditionally been in the news business the way you're in the news business. What do you think about these more lifestyle publications, putting up subscriptions, putting up paywalls, and do you consider them competitors now? How does that change the landscape as they try to shift their models as well?
Well, we're all competitors for time, so this is all about time. But fundamentally, I think that's a very smart strategic move. I think that within organizations and between organizations, there's a lot of consolidation going on because it's pretty challenging out there. But I think that it makes complete strategic sense to have, these are global brands reaching sort of global readerships. So I think that there's a big interface between news and lifestyle. We've gone from news actually into lifestyle. You mentioned how to spend it, also the weekend FT. So I don't see any, and frankly, people have different dimensions through their day. Some minutes they're hard news, other times they want a bit more lifestyle. So I don't think there's any sort of strategic problem. There's an execution challenge, which I think is something for them to deal with. But from a sort of strategic point, I can totally see the logic.
Look, I think, just very briefly, I think it's just an insight into the disruption which will continue. Sometimes internally people will say to me, once we get to this break-even thing, are we kind of done? And we're never going to be done. And on the Condé Nast point is that what they do have is a portfolio of incredible brands which have taken years to cultivate. I think the points, as John was saying, are now different, is distribution. And can those brands ultimately translate into the new forms of consumption? And the answer to that is yes, but you've just got all these cliches of agility and speed and trial and error. And the only thing I think sometimes difficult for news organisations, because it's all about trust, we worry about failing fast and all that sort of stuff, because if you lose your trust, it's all over. I wonder whether the lifestyle brands could potentially test themselves to innovate faster, break a few things on that journey, and I wonder if they would get to solutions a little bit quicker if they just allow themselves to experiment more quickly.
Yeah, one more thing, and then I promise I'll stop.
Fine by us.
On the distribution part, there was a piece in the New York Times about a week ago about potentially all of these startup media companies doing a roll-up. And for a long time, print media has been unbundled. Do you see the potential of some sort of bundling where these are bigger groups where they can optimize audience for advertisers, because advertisers aren't going away, or do you think that the likelihood of that happening is slim to none?
I think it's really hard. I think that it's really hard, and also, going back to this point about differentiation, it's very, very hard if your strategy is based on being different and being special to get together with others in the industry. And I think the second problem there is you start looking inward. You spend your whole time sort of organising inside when you really got to be focused on the reader and the customer. So I think it's going to be difficult, frankly.
For me, I read some the other day, which I thought was really interesting, and how it relates to this business. I'm not sure, but competing is expensive and partnership is cheap. And I'm just wondering whether there are opportunities just to get a little, put some of the tools down and some of the weapons down for a bit, and just try and understand where there's efficiency through collaboration. But at the same time, any joint venture or any collaboration is fraught with problems. And you look at business books, and most of these things come together and end in bloody disaster. And so I think you've just got to be very pragmatic. But consolidation, I think, is inevitable, isn't it, when you've got this much change?
We like to call it back-end synergies.
Because they always happen.
Yeah. Thank you both so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.